The Sonora Desert was no stranger to strange lights and tall tales, but nothing like this. As the sun beat down on the sand, Claude Lacombe, a French scientist known for chasing the unexplainable, arrived at the site with a translator by his side. Before them stood a lineup of World War II fighter jets, perfectly intact, gleaming as if they had just rolled off the assembly line, except they were supposed to have vanished decades ago. Lacombe crouched near one of the planes, running his fingers across the polished metal. The translator stood behind, eyes wide, reading off the engine numbers the workers called out. Lacombe cross-checked each one against the records he had brought. There was no mistake. These were the missing aircraft. The translator's voice cracked as he tried to make sense of it. The jets were back, but the pilots were gone. Determined to piece together the mystery, Lacombe sought out the man who claimed to have seen the planes appear. The local villager was jittery, half his face unnaturally red, as if scorched by a sun lamp. When asked what happened, the man simply said, "The sun came out last night, and it sang to me." Neither Lacombe nor the translator knew how to respond. There were no logical explanations, only growing questions. Far away at the Indianapolis Air Traffic Control Center, an anxious voice crackled over the radio. A commercial flight reported an object ahead, blindingly bright and moving fast. "Indianapolis Center, do you have any military flights up here?" the pilot asked. Negative. There were no scheduled flights, no military exercises. The radar blip confirmed what the pilot saw. Something was out there. When pressed to describe the aircraft, the pilot hesitated. "I can't make out the shape, just alternating red and white lights. Very bright." Seconds later, the object whizzed past, narrowly avoiding collision. The control room erupted into nervous chatter. Meanwhile, in the quiet suburbs of Muncie, Indiana, little Barry was fast asleep when his toys suddenly flickered to life. Plastic soldiers marched, cars zoomed across the floor, and flashing lights filled the room. Startled awake, Barry tiptoed downstairs. The refrigerator door hung open, food spilled across the tiles. The doggy door flapped as if someone, or something, had just passed through. Jillian, Barry's mother, was roused by the noise. Her heart skipped as she glanced out the window and saw her son outside, laughing and running toward the open field as if chasing an invisible friend. Panic surged through her. She bolted outside, calling his name, trying to catch up before he vanished into the dark. On the other side of town, Roy Neary sat in his living room, half watching TV as his wife, Ronnie, scolded him for his careless parenting. Their marriage was on thin ice, and Roy's distraction wasn't helping. The phone rang. It was Earl, Roy's boss at the power company. Massive outages were rolling across the state. They needed every hand in the field. With a weary sigh, Roy grabbed his gear, kissed his family goodbye, and headed out. As Roy drove toward the site, the roads were unusually quiet. Stopping at a railway crossing to check his maps, he noticed a car pulling up behind him. He waved for it to pass, but then the unexpected. The car behind him lifted straight into the air. Mailboxes rattled violently. Roy's flashlight flickered and died. Suddenly, an overwhelming beam of light blasted his truck from above. He leaned out to see, but the light was too bright, forcing him back. Inside the truck, chaos erupted. Tools, papers, maps, all levitated, spinning wildly. The railway crossing signals clanged and shook, and then, just as abruptly, it was over. The light vanished, the objects dropped, his flashlight buzzed back to life. His truck rumbled again. Stunned, Roy heard chatter over the radio. He wasn't the only one. Reports were flooding in about a UFO sighting on a nearby highway. Gripping the wheel, Roy sped toward the scene. Ahead, Gillian was still frantically searching for Barry, who had managed to slip onto the same highway. Roy's truck barreled down the road, narrowly missing the boy as Gillian scooped him up at the last second. Roy skidded to a halt, jumping out to apologize, but before any words were exchanged, brilliant lights streaked across the sky. 3 unmistakable UFOs tore down the highway, police cars in hot pursuit. Without thinking, Roy jumped back into his truck, adrenaline surging, and joined the chase across the toll plaza into Ohio. Behind them, chaos unfolded. A police cruiser veered off the road, crashing into a ditch. Roy, stopping for a moment to catch his breath, noticed something strange. Half of his face, where the light had hit, was now sunburned, just like the man Lacombe had met in Mexico. As the last UFOs disappeared into the night, Roy, Gillian, and the scattered witnesses were left staring at the empty sky, hearts pounding, minds racing. Somewhere, across deserts and oceans, the pieces of an unimaginable puzzle were starting to fall into place. And for Roy and Gillian, the journey into the unknown had just begun. In the days that followed, Roy Neary was no longer himself. Ever since the night of the encounter, his mind buzzed with an image he couldn't shake. A mountain, strange and looming, its shape etched deep into his thoughts. He caught himself sketching it absent-mindedly on notepads, molding it into shaving cream, shaping it out of mashed potatoes at the dinner table. Ronnie watched her husband with growing concern. What had begun as distraction was sliding into obsession, the house filled with tension. Roy's children watched quietly as their father, usually playful but clumsy, turned into a man they didn't recognize. Ronnie tried to snap him out of it, urging him to stop talking about UFOs, to stop encouraging the children to believe in the impossible. But Roy couldn't stop. He needed to know what the mountain meant. At the same time, Ronnie's patience thinned. She pleaded with him to focus on their family, especially after a phone call came in. Roy had been fired from his job for abandoning his post during the statewide power outage. Their fragile marriage was now unraveling. Far from Indiana, Lacombe had traveled to India, where thousands had gathered, chanting a 5-note sequence in perfect unison. The villagers claimed they had heard it from the sky. Lacombe, working with his team of scientists, deciphered the notes and began coordinating with international experts. The music, they believed, wasn't random. It was a message. Soon they were broadcasting the tune into space, and their persistence paid off. The signal returned with a burst of data. Coordinates, precise and undeniable, pointing to Devil's Tower in Wyoming. Back in Indiana, Gillian was in her own spiral. Barry was gone, abducted before her eyes, and no one believed her. She spent sleepless nights drawing the same mountain over and over, her hands raw, her mind exhausted. And when she turned on the TV, she froze. A news report covered a supposed chemical spill near Devil's Tower. urging civilians to evacuate. But Jillian wasn't buying it. The image on the screen was the same one from her sketches, the same one haunting Roy. Roy saw the report too. As the footage of Devil's Tower played, the world snapped into place. This was the mountain, the one inside his head all along. Without hesitating, Roy jumped into his truck and hit the road, leaving behind the remnants of his shattered home. Jillian, driven by the same pull, packed her bags and raced west. In Wyoming, the government was moving fast. Military vehicles rolled through towns, soldiers cordoned off highways, and helicopters hovered overhead. Officials spread panic about a toxic spill, a train derailment leaking dangerous chemicals. Civilians packed their cars and fled in droves, except Roy. As traffic surged away from the region, Roy drove straight toward it. On a narrow road, Roy and Jillian's paths crossed. They recognized each other instantly, two strangers bound by the same mystery. They parked on the roadside, catching their breath, realizing they weren't crazy. Someone else had seen what they saw, felt what they felt. But reaching Devil's Tower wouldn't be easy. Roads were blocked, soldiers checked IDs, and fences stretched for miles. Working together, Roy and Jillian veered off-road, breaking through barriers and tearing across the countryside. The deeper they went, the stranger the landscape became. Horses and cattle lay unconscious by the roadside, sprawled in unnatural stillness. Alarmed, they covered their faces with gas masks, half wondering if the government story was true. But Roy was sure. This was all a cover-up. Their progress didn't go unnoticed. Military patrols swept the area, and soon Roy and Jillian were caught. Hauled into custody, they were brought before Latham and his team. To Roy's astonishment, Latham was sympathetic. He showed Roy a series of photographs, dozens of people from all over the world, all strangers, yet all had been driven by the same vision of Devil's Tower. Roy realized he wasn't alone. The military had its own plan, and civilians weren't part of it. Roy, Jillian, and another man named Larry were loaded onto a helicopter with others who had been drawn here. But Roy wasn't finished. When the opportunity came, the three of them broke free, slipping away into the dark. They ran toward the looming mountain, its shape now unmistakable against the horizon. As they climbed, the military deployed aerosol sleep gas, sweeping the area to knock out trespassers, the same method they'd used on the livestock. Helicopters whirred overhead, spraying clouds of chemicals. Larry fell behind, coughing and stumbling, and was swiftly captured. But Roy and Jillian pressed on, scrambling up the rocky slopes, determined to see what waited at the summit. Breathless and scraped, they reached a ridge overlooking the government's secret base. Below, floodlights crisscrossed the ground, satellite dishes pointed skyward, and teams of scientists hurried between equipment. Roy and Jillian crouched, hearts pounding, watching the stage being set for something far beyond anything they'd imagined. The mountain had called them here, and now they were on the brink of witnessing why. The night air over Devil's Tower pulsed with tension. Roy and Jillian crouched behind a rocky outcrop, eyes wide, breath sharp in their chests. Below them, the military base hummed with controlled chaos. Rows of antennas, blinking monitors, men and women in uniforms, sprinting from post to post. Floodlights bathed the towering rock in a pale glow, cutting through the cold dark. But all of that fell away the moment the first UFO appeared. A soft glow on the horizon became three. Three glowing craft emerged, gliding toward the base in eerie silence. They hovered above the scientists, circling like curious birds. Lacombe and his team moved into position, hearts pounding, their instruments ready. Slowly, the scientists played the musical sequence they decoded, 5 haunting notes rising into the night sky. The UFOs answered, not with aggression, not with threat, but with music, repeating the tune, reshaping it, adding their own voices to the conversation. For a moment, Roy felt tears sting his eyes. He turned to Gillian, who clutched his arm, trembling, not with fear, but with awe. Here, at the edge of everything they understood, they were witnesses to a conversation between worlds. The craft lifted and vanished into the sky, leaving the ground team cheering. But the cheers faded quickly when the horizon split open in a storm of light. The mothership arrived. It was vast beyond anything Roy had imagined, a floating city of light and sound. Its presence swallowed the base in a hum that filled the air, the ground, the bones. It moved with an elegance no human machine could match, gliding into position before the tower. The 5-note tune rose again from the human instruments, and the ship responded, flooding the night with sound. But this time it didn't stop. The notes expanded, unfolded, became a language. Inside the base, scientists scrambled to mimic the tones, fingers darting over keyboards, hands flashing signals. Lacombe watched, stunned, as the mothership taught them, note by note, rhythm by rhythm, how to understand. Then the ship opened. A hatch unfolded like a glowing petal, and from the light, figures stepped forward. The crowd gasped as the first to emerge were human, the missing pilots from World War II, their faces young, unaged, the crew of the Cotopaxi, their eyes blinking against the bright lights, the people snatched from their lives across decades. Time had not touched them. Gillian's breath hitched in her throat, her knees buckling as Barry emerged, clutching a small alien hand. She ran forward without thinking, tears streaming, as she swept her son into her arms. Barry buried his face in her neck, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them. From the hatch, the aliens came, slender, luminous beings with elongated limbs and eyes deep as the universe. They moved gracefully, childlike figures among them, stepping into the human world with a calm curiosity. One adult alien approached Lacombe. With trembling hands, he raised the hand signals he had practiced, and to his astonishment, the alien mirrored them, answering gesture with gesture. In that moment, Lacombe understood. The years of chasing mysteries, the sleepless nights, the whispered ridicule, all of it had led here. Then came the final, astonishing moment. A group of chosen humans, volunteers selected to represent Earth, assembled before the ship. Lacombe moved quickly through the group, hesitating as he reached Roy. "He belongs," Lacombe murmured to the officials, urgency in his voice. Roy felt his pulse thunder as the alien children approached. With small hands, they chose him, touched his arm, pulled him gently toward the ship. Gillian watched from the edge of the crowd, Barry's arms tight around her neck. Their eyes met, hers wet with both heartbreak and understanding. his shining with a joy he could not explain. Roy took a trembling breath, his face still marked by the sunburn from that first encounter, and smiled. For the first time in days, maybe longer, the weight in his chest lifted. As Roy crossed the threshold of the ship, he looked back one last time. Gillian, Lakem, Barry, all standing in a sea of faces, all changed by what they had seen. The hatch closed, the engines hummed, and the mothership lifted into the stars, its lights fading into the endless black. On the ground, no one spoke. The night was still. Above them, the sky stretched wide and infinite, a reminder that they were no longer alone. Gillian held Barry tighter. Lacombe wiped his eyes behind his glasses, and the scientists, the soldiers, and the bystanders stood frozen, watching as the impossible became memory. For Roy, the journey was just beginning. For everyone left behind, the world would never be the same. And above, in the quiet dark, the stars waited.